Good morning.
Good
Morning.
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 Yeah, good morning from Ethiopia.
Morning.
Okay, it looks like everyone's joined. So, kia ora, Morena, welcome back. Welcome to session 3. Before we start with the content, first I will open with a karakia just to settle us in this space. Mori oho, mori tu, mori ora kia tatou. Homie, huie, tai kie.
Yeah.
So today we have Dr. Tim Fadgen with us again, and I'm also thoroughly delighted to welcome Associate Professor Salau, who is from criminology and a little bit sociology maybe, but she will introduce herself properly. So yes, thank you so much, Salau and Tim, for joining us today. I do need to apologize. I'm still having problems with IT around Canvas. I think I've managed to get one of you on. Milimo, you will have received an invitation. I don't think anyone else has, unfortunately. If I can't get you on by tomorrow morning, I will make a Google Drive or something with all of the resources in there, the recordings and the readings. So because I can't keep waiting for IT, it's too frustrating. So before I hand over to Salau, I just wanted to hand over to Antonia, who is your success advisor, who just wanted to remind you about her drop-in visiting office hours. Antonia?
Thank you, Suzanne. Good morning, everyone from Africa. It's evening here. I just wanted to remind all of you that I do have the drop-in sessions every Tuesday and Friday. So it will usually be here it will be our own 6 p.m. So for your time, depending on where you are, it could be 5 a.m. or later than 6, whichever one it is. So if you have a need to talk about anything that is beyond the course content, or you need some clarities about the course or how to get stuff going, just any concerns you need, just come into that space and talk to me and we can figure out how to help you. Cool. Thanks, Susan.
Thanks, Antonia. Perhaps could you send an email to everyone with just reminding them of the time and your Zoom link?
Sure, I'll do that.
Brilliant. Thank you.
You're
Right.
welcome.
I will be quiet now and I will hand over to Salau. Thank you, Salau.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Suzanne. I'm just trying to work out how to shift my screen. Okay. There we go. So just introducing myself, I understand that you know Tim already. It's lovely to be able to see well, there was one of you who was live in person. I can see your face, but I can see your names, and I've got a bit of information from the team about you guys and your respective roles and so forth and where you're from. So for myself, my name is Tamaselau Swali Isauni. I am Samoan, but I live here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and I've been here since I was 3. So I've got a few grey hairs, so I've been here for a while now. I, as has been said, teach in criminology at the moment, but I have a sociology and law background. So there's a little bit of info there on me. I don't know, Tim, if you want to say a little bit about yourself. I presume you've already said it, but there's information on Tim there as well. I see you've taken...
Just to say good morning, everyone. It's good to see you again. Look forward to talking with you today.
Awesome. Okay, so I look forward to learning a little bit more about you as you share in our group sessions, feedback sessions, but just kind of moving along in terms of our agenda. what we'd like to do today is cover the concepts of jurisprudence and rule of law. I see from the spreadsheet that some of you have a legal background, but not all of you. So some of you also have an interest in the rule of law and different issues around how law and governance works together. So this session kind of takes a few steps back and gets us on the same page in terms of what we understand about LAW law. And this concept of utilising the rule of law as a way of governing our nations, and what that means internationally in terms of the transfer of different laws and policies across different nation states. So a bit of sharing about that would be, I'm looking forward to that, looking forward to hearing a bit about your own country context and how law LAW works. Some reflections perhaps on the way in which LORE, as has been sometimes described, our traditions or our customs, and how that sits within the different legal spheres or governance spheres. So talking about jurisprudence and the rule of law. And then I'd like to focus in on this concept of legal personhood as a way of talking through this relationship between the different aspects of the rule of law and governance. And so again, we'll actually have a video. So hopefully by then, Suzanne, you'll have on top of the video and everyone be able to view it simultaneously. Fingers crossed that the technology works, and that'll give you a break from listening to me, and you get to watch and see a little bit of Aotearoa in the context of legal personhood. And so that kind of brings, after we've had a feedback session and discussion on it, we'll take a break. We'll have a summary section, and then we'll take a break, and that brings us to the end of my session, and then I'll hand it over to Tim to do his stuff. And so Tim will be looking at the human rights concepts and institutions. We'll be exploring different climate change, something we're feeling a lot at the moment in Aotearoa, New Zealand, with the flooding we've got. And then some citizenship issues. So that's our agenda for today. Looking forward to sharing with you. Okay, so in terms of jurisprudence and the rule of law, the rule of law is a concept and a institutional process, institutional structure that has been set in place. There's a colonial history that's obviously associated with it, and many of our countries across the world have had experience of this. Today, in terms of the democratic nation state systems that were set up and centralized governing systems, there is a strong rationale for having the rule of law. So the key idea and questions that I'd like you to think about as I talk through some of the different concepts and models around the rule of law is this idea of what the most dominant jurisprudential framework is, or the underlying legal philosophy is behind the rule of law that operates in your respective country, in Africa as a broader region or continent, and then in terms of what you might see as appropriate for the world as a whole, as a global, increasingly interconnected global system. There are still some really small parts of the world that aren't linked in, but they're so remote and so few. We are very much an interconnected global society, economy. And so having this notion of a rule of law becomes more and more prominent in thinking through how we might understand it and enable our idiosyncrasies and our uniqueness as various nation states, various local communities to be retained, notwithstanding these kind of broader, more human protection aspects within the rule of law that we want to uphold. So that's kind of an overview statement that I have there for you to think about in terms of the rule of law. And when you go into your breakout sessions, to have some reflections on this concept and that question. So in terms of these key ideas that are implicit in this concept of the rule of law, the notion of a social contract sits at the heart of it. And again, some of this might be, old hat for you, very familiar for you, for those who have legal training and political studies training, for others maybe not so. But the idea of a social contract is interesting to reflect on, particularly for countries whose peoples and cultures and traditions have a very different history to that from where the original ideas of the rule of law came. So the rule of law is something that has grown out of the European history, European governing systems, and has a location in these ideas that individual rights are important, this notion of the individual, this notion of property, the protection of property, and centralized government having a responsibility to its citizens, to individual citizens, and that the rule of law is to protect those rights and to protect rights over property and in relation to each other. So I want you to kind of think about that. For those that don't have a lot of understanding around the social contract, talk in your little groups about what that might be, and be interesting to have a good discussion around that. So there's a key relationship between this idea of a social contract and the rule of law. The other aspect of this that I think is important to point out is the notion of the kind of the more sacred, secular aspects of society, of life, that has been separated when there's a separation between church and state in this model of both the social contract and the rule of law. So again, thinking about how these ideas translate or transfer, are imported, taken on board in your own respective countries and the institutions that you deal with in terms of the rule of law and how that operates in your institutions. So key institutions there, thinking about democracy, democratically elected governors, officials, the way in which our central public service system works, and the importance of having a centralized legal system to govern those relationships, the relationships between governing officers and the wider public, the wider citizenry, and between different government institutions or private organizations or private individuals. Okay, so having a think about that, and you can see the way in which society has broken itself up in the modern context. We have centralized media systems where the news is communicated through centralized organizations, and we also have a significant NGO system or a non-government organization system, and all of this is part of the equation around the rule of law. The other thing about the rule of law is obviously there are institutions within the legal system, say, for example, the courts, the Ministry of Justice, police, corrections, children's ministries that are affected or have a direct input into the perception of how the rule of law works. Okay, so all of these things are interconnected and are important to this model that we've adopted in our democratic liberal societies. Okay. So the next kind of main screen, and I know there's lots of information here, but the main point is that there are different branches, philosophical branches, that have huge influence over the way in which we come to understand how the law, LAW, and the rule of law works in our democratic societies, liberal democratic societies. So these are legal formalism, these are legal positivism, legal realism, legal pluralism, and I put those two together because they often inform each other. And in kind of the evolvement and development of law, LAW, you see that there's legal pluralism has evolved out of legal realism. Then there are concepts of natural law, which is different, I would argue, to Indigenous ideas of the laws of nature. And so these theoretical frameworks are really important in terms of really getting a nuanced understanding of the way in which the liberal legal system works, okay? And its interactions with the political system, with the governing systems that we have set up within most of our nation state economies and societies. Okay, so Suzanne, I'm presuming that these guys will be able to get a copy of these slides and be put into, I don't know if you get Canvas working, put into your Canvas page, otherwise you'll put it into your Google page. So to that end, you can read through the details later, but in terms of legal formalism, what's important to note here is that there's in terms of these models of the rule of law, these models of legal approaches to the law, the idea that there ought to be formal legal structures in place and institutions in place that provide legal principles. So say, for example, the courts, okay, so the judges make law. There are common law principles, and that the common law, therefore, is a binding, enforceable legal outcome. There are legal rules there that must be followed, but there's a formal structure to it. So the formalism aspect is important. If there isn't that formalism, the argument is that it therefore isn't law. Okay, so that's something to think about. The other, which kind of connects very closely to this, and as with most of these kind of developments in frameworks of this kind, subsequent frameworks evolve because there is some tweaking that is suggested to be in need from an earlier framework. So legal positivism comes into play as statutes become more and more important, and judges decide that there is, in terms of the letter of the law, that you can't go beyond that it's for Parliament to make the call on whether something ought to be changed or not, but it's for the judges to interpret the law. Right, so judges don't make law, and according to a particular school, judges merely interpret the law. And so taking a more positivistic interpretation or reading of laws usually aligns with this line of thinking. Okay. The legal realism puts on the table the idea that judges actually do make law, and that the political context, that the social environment, the economic environment actually does have a real influence on lawmaking and law interpretation and so forth. So there's a body of thought that says, actually, in terms of the rule of law, you've got to look at the real context in which law actually operates on the ground, and even in the parliamentary context. So legal realism becomes really interesting and important in that respect. Now, as the concept, as the words imply, legal pluralism, again, introduces, it develops and evolves even more this kind of rule of law concept, which says in the multicultural societies that we live in, actually there are many ways of thinking about the law, and indeed we are getting different kinds of legal systems coming and cohabiting together. So in many of the colonial nations and many of the nations that have evolved out of that history, you have the rule of law that's been imported by the British, say, for example, in Aotearoa, and you have the indigenous systems in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And so a pluralistic system suggests that there are legal frameworks, legal institutions that don't derive legitimacy from the one source. That there are many sources of legitimacy that are actually quite different. That means that, say, for example, the indigenous system don't draw on the British system for legitimacy. Legitimacy is given to it through its indigenous sources of law. And in that respect, the argument, and I know this is to be the case in many of the nation states in Africa, that the indigenous system or the local system, traditional system, has got its own legal legitimacy, and there's an attempt to try and get these different legal systems to cooperate or to work together. So that's kind of the branch of legal pluralism that within the rule of law, there's an attempt to try and work through. And it's obviously highly complex and very challenging, but as societies become more and more integrated, if you like, there is lots more conversation around that branch of legal philosophy. And so the last two are again, and I've alluded to it, you know, talking about natural justice principles and recognizing that there may be different natural justice principles within the imported systems of law and different within the indigenous systems of law. So that's a lot to take in. It's all on that slide. There are some sources there that you can have a look at. We have, in the New Zealand context, we had a New Zealand Law Commission in 2016 do some work, and there's some really good discussion that they've provided, and you can find that source up on the internet. It's pretty easy. If you just Google that the name of that source, you'll be able to get a PDF copy of it online. So you can work through a little bit more slowly some of these concepts, but right now, what would be really cool is if we had a bit of a breakout session. Suzanne, I don't know, five or six?
I have the rooms ready. I have 5 rooms.
Yep.
That's all right.
Awesome. So if we just put you into these 5 groups, and you can talk to the members of your group, and I'd like you to do basically 2 things. It's outlined there, but to have a spokesperson who can share back when you feedback to the group who the members are, a little bit about the members in your group. I haven't met any of you. Tim has had the privilege already, but I haven't met any of you, so I'd love to at least hear a little bit about your members, and then to think about what jurisprudential framework you guys have in your own respective country states, how that works within your legal system, and one kind of main legal rule of law issue that you guys are really interested in. Okay. Right. Okay, so can everyone sorry, I'm just trying to get back into my system here. Okay. Right, so if we could go through quickly, but not, rushed, through each of some of your feedback, and I'm presuming that you were able to, nominate a spokesperson for each of your groups. So if we start from group 1, this is a group that had Faith, Lillian, Padmine, Utsi, and Celinde. Apologies if I've mispronounced. So who was your spokesperson for room 1, for group 1? That Lillian?
That would be me, yes.
Yeah.
Hi.
Wonderful. Hi.
Here. So a group of 5, very fine mix from South Africa, Eswatini, Mauritius, and Uganda, and myself from Tanzania. Experts in different sectors other than anything legal. So we struggled a bit in terms of the interpretation, etc. But I guess in the end, we had a very, very hands-on sort of a rich discussion. So Slindile, Padimine, Vuzi, and Faith, and Padime, if I'm pronouncing your name badly, please excuse. Padmin, yes. It's the intonations there. So I guess all around, and excuse me, I was telling my group I'm recovering from COVID, so a bit of coughing and bad throat. All around the team, I think one of the core aspects in terms of the legal frameworks that sort of operate in these countries is sort of a mix. One, for example, a case from both Eswatini, Tanzania, and Mauritius and South Africa, we have the formal sort of Western legal frameworks that include, what you would see in very many democratic countries, and operational. I'm not saying sort of well-functioning parliament. We have constitutions, and our parliaments do enact law in accordance to the constitutions. We have courts of laws that sort of create precedences in terms of judgments, etc. But also we do recognize customary laws, and in particularly South Africa, recognize indigenous sort of variables within societies. And I think they've seen how these systems work. And also the interplay, for example, I was giving a good example from Tanzania, the interplay between these formal institutions, excuse me, with the core institutions, such as how do the police fit into that? How do I forget, but all the legal is all the other key institutions, how do they fit in with these legal frameworks? In terms of the key issues that we sort of picked up, I think in as much as these countries have constitutions, have legal frameworks, but how they go about it is not essentially within the right frameworks of good governance. So for example, how do people, when courts create precedents, I mean, that should, follow through, but how individuals are treated, for example, if you are more important in the society vis-a-vis if you're not, essentially, it creates that differences in the country, and that's been echoed between Eswatini, South Africa, and Mauritius. But in Tanzania and Uganda in particular, we talked about this lack of separation of mandates within these core institutions, where it interferes with the fundamental legal frameworks, regardless be it customary or the borrowed Western democratic legal formalism. So how the police work or how the judiciary works sort of interferes, and then you see the state coming in. How far is the church or the religion separated from, the state institutions? I guess this is also very thin lines. And in most cases, especially in Tanzania, there is no separation. For example, here, the state is the party and the parliament is the party. So there are those issues within those. So I will stop here. I'll let my colleagues, if I know I'm not an expert in this subject, but please, colleagues.
I think that was a wonderful summary of a very interesting discussion, it seems, that you guys had. So some really interesting points I think were raised, and particularly what you're talking about in terms of lack of separation of mandates. I think that's something to kind of put there on the table for us to kind of think about and reflect on. So Thank you very much, Lillian, on behalf of your group. If we could go to group 2, the spokesperson for group 2.
Yes, it's me. I am Taslima from Mauritius, and I'm representing group 2. So in our group, we have 2 participants from Ethiopia, 1 from Zambia, 1 from Eswatini, and myself from Mauritius. A brief, which I have understand from the Ethiopian side, is we have AMA, which is from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, where in Ethiopia we have no such legal framework, but we have the constitution, which is the main framework. And then you have also the civil law, procedural and common law in Ethiopia, where we have also that is the main system, the international, based on the constitution, it is based on international, how it is. Then the main issue is mainly we have seen that we have to have a right balance between these constitution. So moving from Eswatini, we have Senele Sive, which is from Eswatini, where there is the legal framework is based on the national system. You have the common law, civil law also, and Senele Sive is from the Ministry of Commerce. And the main, we have the kingdom there, the kingdom of Eswatini. The head of the state is the king, right? And then, for the implementation of law, you have also, that is for the implementation, it has to go from the king together with the government, the actual government in place, and you have also the parliament for the implementation, right? The main, it is like a mixture. It is like a dual system, the national system and also from the head of the state.
Right.
You have also the main issue which Senele Sive has raised is that you have the traditional system and the national law, the modern system. Maybe we have to reform the constitution. Then we have Milimo from Zambia, who is a biologist from the Ministry of Fisheries and Livestock. Zambia has been colonized by the British, and they have also the constitution, mainly from the British side, right? The common law and the customary law. That is, you have the judge, you have the magistrate, you have the judge, and you have the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is the highest court for appeal. And the main issue which Milimo has raised is that you have certain part of the law has to be repealed because some politicians are using like part of the law to oppress the smaller group, the smaller party. One example is what he mentioned is that some politicians are using this piece of law in order not to allow certain small parties to participate in the election, in the campaign. So the certain law has to be repealed.
Right, okay.
And finally, I'll come with myself. I am from Mauritius, and I am mainly from the Ministry of Financial Services and Good Governance. I work as the financial and governance analyst. And for Mauritius, we have been colonized by both the French and the British. So we have also a mixture. We have a mixture of the jurisprudential framework, which is a mixed legal system inherited by both French and British. We have the constitution as the base, based on the Westminster model from the England, right? And the substantive law, we have the civil rights, property law, contract law, which are from the French. So we have a mixture of both. And the procedural law are from the English, from the British side. That it is. And the main issue, which I think from the African side and Mauritius also, is that some parts have to be revised coming with a new system, with the evolution, with the new system in place nowadays, we have to enrich our law. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Teus. Yes, certainly the law reform issues that you've put forward, it's very interesting in terms of thinking about the jurisprudential approach that your lawmakers take. So thank you very much for that, for sharing on behalf of your group. So group 3, this is the one that I've got Antonina down as being a part of. Barbara Sibylle or Sibylle, Joseph and Mixolitsi. Again, apologies. So Joseph, is this your group?
Yes, I'm representing on behalf of my group, group 3. We had in there Barbara from Ghana, who's my colleague in the office. We have Sibylle from Eswatini, Impo from Botswana, and then Nkosi from South Africa.
Right. Milo, thank you.
Okay, so just as the first person who gives her submission, we do not have a lot of legal background, and therefore we had a little bit challenge with regard to understanding and then interpreting what we were reading, but then also we did our best to the best of our knowledge to have this discussion, a fruitful one, and then try to understand what we are doing regarding the jurisprudential framework in our various countries. So we got to know that in all of our countries, we have a working constitution that guides our countries, our various countries, which happens to be the legal framework, the basic principle of laws of our nation, from which all other laws must conform. That is, any executive action, any judicial decision, they should all conform to our constitution. And so we also got to know that we dealt a little bit deeper into the levels of our courts. And then we got to know that the highest courts or decision-making body of our country, that would be the Supreme Court, and it runs through all the nations. We all have a Supreme Court, followed by we have Court of Appeal. We also have the High Court, the Circuit Courts. These circuit and then district courts are in Ghana, but then also in South Africa, they also have the 13 high courts. They have like 13 high courts. They have the labor courts, they have the appeal courts, just as other jurisdictions. And so all these various courts have their own jurisdictions that they operate. And so the highest, in case of any issues with interpretation of the law, you can consult the Supreme Court to give such interpretations of the law. And if there is any other issue at their parts, if we are still not okay with interpretation, or we also have issues, then they can resort to the parliament in Ghana. This is, for instance, in Ghana, resort to the parliament for a better interpretation to the court, so that every party will understand and then know how to apply the law in order to have a fair hearing or a fair judgment. And so we also decided to look at some of the, and then also in Ghana, we do practice basically everything that the key branches of jurisprudence, that is the legal formalism. In Ghana, we do have that, as well as some other jurisdictions that those coming from our jurisdictions. We also have the legal positivism. Yes, that is whereby we consult the parliament in situations that we need understanding to the laws. And then just as the legal realism and then legal pluralism, yes, we have we do practice in Ghana the common law. And so with the common law, we do have a lot of cases that in case of applying the law and how to apply judgments, you can resort to, and then it will guide the judges to give out a good judgment. And so we also have the dispute resolution methods. that we can also consult to, not only the legal way, the arbitration, that is not only arbitration, but we can also consult to the mediation, negotiation, and then as well as conciliation, and like we call ADR, alternative dispute resolutions, that can also somehow expedite the judgments, because arbitration takes a lot of time, and then it's also costly, and therefore we also sometimes our laws in Ghana, and I believe other jurisdictions also try to convince us to do the ADR, that is a quick resolution. And then also we do practice the bylaws, the chiefs, the indigenous people, they also have their own set of laws that not different from, they all conform to the constitution, but these are indigenous laws that are still practiced in our various, especially in Ghana. We have our chiefs, which are very supreme, and you can resort to them for any relief. Instead of going to the courts, you can decide to go to the chiefs for the bylaws to be applied. And so we decided to look at some of the problems that are some of the issues facing the rule of law in our countries, and among them, to mention but a few, because there are quite a number of issues that we have to deal with, but to mention but a few, we have accountability issues. That is our courts having the issue of accountability to the people. We also have a clear issue of clear and fair process for enforcing the law, though there's supposed to be rule of law, but then most often you get to know that external influences affects the way laws, judgments are being passed. And then we have political influence regarding your position in the country. That determines how the rule of law applies to you. So if you are the most powerful, some are untouchable, though the law is not supposed to be like that. It's supposed to be fair, free, equity, but then it is not. If you happen to, if you just say you have an issue with a person of influence, then you should know that you are definitely going to be, the law is not going to favor you in that way. And then also corruption. Corruption, even in Ghana, long ago, we had the issue of corruption in our court system. And so there was an expose that exposed a lot of corrupt lawyers, judges, and all that. And so corruption, sometimes people think corruption is only the person taking the money, but then the one also influencing the other party is also corrupt. And so we need to also look at that part, because it's not only about the receiver, the giver is also as corrupt as the receiver. And so you are influencing, you do not want the equity of the law to be applied fairly, and therefore you want to twist the law in your favor. And therefore we also have to tackle that part, whereby people should desist from trying to bribe or bribe their way to getting favorable outcomes in our various courts. And so crime that also happens in our countries are also issues facing rule of law, because the laws have been, astute laws are laid down, but then also people decide to not to follow the due precedence in doing things, and so commit certain level of crimes. And so these are some of the things that we're able to discuss, and we hope as we continue, we get more understanding. Yeah, thank you.
Fantastic. Lovely to hear all the complexity of your discussion that came through. So certainly, I know that much of what you've said, Joseph, would resonate with the other groups and their discussion. And certainly, it's one thing to have the theory. It's the other thing to have the practice, and the reality on the ground. But in many ways, you need both, because sometimes if you're just operating on what you normally do in practice, you don't have any vision. So that in that way, you do need this kind of theoretical framework to kind of think through some of the issues, both for the long term and for the short term. So thank you very much for those thoughts and for introducing your group. So thank you everybody for your patience. 2 more groups, wonderful feedback. So we're on to group 4. Margaret's group, Sarah, Stephanus Satanand, and the Singh, and again, my apologies for pronunciation. So who was the spokesperson in group 4?
Okay, so the group 4, we had, as you introduced us, 5 members, Ntabiseng, South Africa, Stephanos, Namibia, Satinant, Mauritius, Margaret, Malawi, and Sarah, Kenya. And I think what is common amongst all of us was that we have, parliament, there's government, and then there are courts. So that was clear. But in terms of individual countries, there are nuances. Mauritius, I think they've got 2 systems. They initially were colonized by the French and then the British. So that influenced their current system, which they implement in a hybrid way. So they've got to take into consideration both when they implement their laws, or that is part of their system. So basically that legislation had to be done in such a way that both of them are incorporated in the laws. The main issue they have currently, that is enforcement of laws. And, as we know that in terms of their judiciary systems, also the highest courts are the Supreme Courts. So enforcement becomes a problem because, sometimes if issues have to go to the Supreme Courts, it takes time. So also it's also a costly process. So that is the main issue. And then for Malawi, they were colonized by the British. So the laws are mostly British laws. And, as I said, everybody has got, they've got parliament, government, and courts. Their basic issue in terms of, problems are law enforcement, and also that, like every system, there's a lot of loopholes, but basically, their system is also quite old. So they're still operating on old systems, which means, it gives rise to loopholes, some of the so that perpetuates problems because people, they break law knowing what are the repercussions, which repercussions, are based on all those old laws. So that is the major issue, or one of the issues she thinks, it needs to be looked at. And then Kenya was also colonized by the British, so their law is basically influenced by the British. So they've got 3 arms of judiciary. The biggest issue that they are facing. So basically, their laws are working, in theory. But the biggest issue that they are facing is corruption. So which means we could say, well-oiled machinery, but has got also issues. It needs to be dealing with issues of corruption as well as the whole nation is experiencing. So. South Africa was also colonized by the British. So we've got British, our laws are mostly influenced by the British laws. But with South Africa, we incorporated indigenous laws. So there is a pluralism there. So our system, our judiciary system, in theory, when you look into it, it's a well-oiled machinery, but implementation is something else. So, but in terms of the jurisprudence framework, you know, there's a social contract. People have got, you know, they've got believe in the system. They've got rights. They can exercise their rights. They can, you know. So there is a whole issue of human rights. South Africa, like other nations, the biggest issue is corruption, which the courts are dealing with. But then, you know, it's got its own unintended consequences economically, socially, and so on. So that is what we are dealing with as a nation currently. Namibia was colonized by the British, but also South Africans. So they have that, you know, their system are influenced by the two countries. They have indigenous laws, but I think, you know, Stefana said they're not fully implemented. I think maybe there's certain things that are implemented that are indigenous, but it will take time to, you know, either to implement or to fully incorporate those. Similarly, you know, there's a social contract, there are human rights, and the problem that they are looking at is delay in the system. So there's quite, you know, like turnaround times, delays into the whole system. So, you know, it ends up, you know, people feeling like, you know, things are not working. So basically, that's the 5 of us.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that summary. There's again lots of resonances, common themes coming through from the earlier groups. So yeah, really appreciate you taking the time to bring through each of the different unique aspects or the different themes and issues that came out of your group discussion. So thank you very much. And our, by no means least, but our last group, which is group 5, Sufian or Ethiopia, Chuma, Gambo, Rajan, and these are the names I have on my screen. Viwe. So who was your spokesperson in this last group, group 5?
Morning, everyone. I'm the spokesperson for group 5. We had members from Ethiopia, myself, South Africa, and also Mauritius. And those are the members who were able to speak. Some of our members had connectivity issues. I was unfortunately kicked out of the session. So I will respond on the first and the second question, and then I'll ask one of my team members to assist with the third question because it happened while I was not in the group. As I mentioned, we have members from Mauritius, South Africa, and Ethiopia. And in Mauritius, they have a hybrid system which incorporates the French Napoleon Code Napoleon, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it right, Code Napoleon law, and also the British law. So the French law in Mauritius influences the civil and common law, while the criminal proceedings are modeled through the English law. In South Africa, we also have a hybrid system, which is a product of the Dutch law, the English law, and also the common law, the customary law, which is the indigenous law of the people. And then in Ethiopia, they have, the rule of law is categorized in such a way that they have the federal legislature, they have the federal executive, and an overall judicial body. And also they have state executives, the state legislature. And then to come to the third question in South Africa, I think the biggest problem we've had is that we've seen over the years that not everyone is equal before the law. I'll make an example with a recent incident that we had involving the current president, which according to the law, he has broken a number of laws, which includes the currency and exchange law, which prohibits anyone from entering with foreign currency into the country without any authorization. So through that whole process, we have seen how the law has been amended or has been molded to fit into the narrative that we are receiving from this specific individual. And that has just proven how some people are just above the law and will mold and use aspects of the system to their own benefit. I'll now ask one of the members to please come in and elaborate on some of the issues that were identified by the other team members on question 3. And also, Chiaume, I didn't get your inputs because I was kicked out.
Okay, so does any of the other members of your team want to?
Yes, okay, let me think. I'm Sufyan. Let me take for the third question, that is the most important rule of law issue. We have discussed some, we have pointed out some issues on this. In Ethiopia, the most important issue is in relation to rule of law is accountability and stability. This is the most important thing. And an independent and impartial judiciary that promotes and ensures transparent, timely, predictable resolution of disputes is the most important point that we have, that we mentioned in Ethiopia. And in addition to this, lack of effective and efficient public institutions that empower business and individuals to make a positive contribution to the economy and the society. This is that we lack, that we as a deficiency that we face in Ethiopia, and this is the most important. And on the other point, in Nigeria, our colleagues have pointed out corruption is the main issue, the most important issue for the rule of law that they are facing in Nigeria. They pointed out at that. That's all I have.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sufyan. I think there's lots of...
Sorry, can I speak briefly?
Yep, sure.
Good morning, everyone. I had a bit of a technical issue when we were at the breakout section, but I'm Chioma from Nigeria. I think the basic system of laws in place that I'm aware of is the English law, the customary law, and then the Sharia law. Right. But the major issue Nigeria faces with dispensation of its jurisprudential framework is basically corruption, because most of the CEOs of this system of laws are usually appointed by the political class, the government. So they somehow influences their decisions. Like the Chief Justice of Nigeria is usually appointed by the president. So he most times dances to the tune of the political party in place. You know, thereby making you not having access to the justice that you deserve. So I think corruption is the basic issue of rule of law in Nigeria. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, good morning. Please, can I chip in something?
Gambo?
Okay, yes.
Say something? Okay.
Yes.
Is that okay?
Good morning.
Quickly. Yep.
So I'm Gambo Nurdin Bello from Nigeria. I think most of these laws, as in across Africa, the major problem that I see is actually that the laws are not optimized to fit the cultures of the African countries. It's just like we picked a system of government from a culture that is totally different from ours, and it's being imposed on us. So I believe the law should be optimized, you understand, to meet the standard and the culture, the manner and mannerisms of each and every country. Thank you.
Thank you. So common theme around accountability, I think, and the rule of law and the place of the rule of law in terms of enforcing those accountability, fair process, etc. Principles that we kind of uphold, at least in theory, in our democratic nation. So heaps to think about. Gives you a taste of the rule of law issues, its complexities and how it plays out, not only across Africa, but these are key issues across the world as we increasingly take on very similar democratic institutions. So some food for thought. I'm going to give you a chance now to kind of have a bit of a stretch. There's been a lot of information that's been talked through. Have a bit of a stretch. Then I want to come back and talk through a case study on this concept of legal personhood. So in the back of your mind, you're thinking about legal context, the rule of law, the different frameworks that are assumed within that rule of law for your respective country, for your region, continent, and for the world more generally. And then think about this notion of legal personhood and whether it's novel, whether it actually exists in your particular country. And that is as an example of some of the different kind of legal innovations that have been, it might be innovative in some places and not in others, but it'd be really useful to have this discussion around legal personhood and how it plays out. So 2 minutes, big stretch, maybe go for a walk, then come back, 2 minutes, and then we'll start again, okay? Because I know we're going through and cutting into Tim's time. So we're gonna take off and then come back, all right?
Okay, sorry, I'm not coming back. I think I'm gonna have load shedding from now, 8 o'clock. So it was good meeting you. I won't be part of the next session. Okay, thank you.
Okay, well, all the best and lovely to meet you. But 2 minutes, everybody, and then we'll see you back. 2 minutes by my clock. Most people back. Great question, Lillian, and nice to have some time to read the chat actually. So wonderful to see you guys taking that up. So we're just going to keep moving. And this is where we have a video. Is that okay, Suzanne?
Yes, I have the video.
Okay. And for this section, as I said earlier, we're going to look at this concept of legal personhood, which basically talks about giving natural entities like rivers, mountains, forests, etc., legal personhood. Okay, so at present, the concept of legal personhood is something that we ascribe to a company or to a human person and give them rights and responsibilities. And it's relatively new, this concept of giving legal personhood to the environment, okay, so to natural entities in this way. So I've just got this little slide here. This information, again, it'll be given to you when you get a copy of the slides, but it's I talked through it in this little video clip, which is roughly about 13 minutes. So hopefully most of you will be able to see it your side. Okay, so. Do I have to stop sharing screen my side?
I'll just take control, thank you.
Okay, you take control. Greetings, everyone. This short video has been set up to provide some extra information on our legal personhood case study. It includes a 3.5-minute YouTube video clip. The YouTube clip allows you to see what the Whanganui River, the river in Aotearoa, New Zealand, at the centre of our case study looks like, which is important, and that's a picture of it there on the slide. It also provides contextual information around why and how the Whanganui River came to be given legal personhood. There's a few YouTube clips listed at the bottom of the slide, and as well a Vimeo clip. There will obviously be some overlaps in content in these clips, but each one does have something within that is different and adds to the overall story. You don't need to watch them all, but for those interested in digging a bit deeper into what the issues are for the Whanganui people and for New Zealand as a whole, and why this was such a landmark case for them, all of these clips I think are useful. So our case study is designed to give you some basic understandings of the legal personhood concept and the different jurisprudential ideas that sit within it. Fundamental to all modern liberal democratic nation states is the law, that is LAW, rather than LORE. And the idea that the law's main role in society is to provide and regulate the rights and responsibilities of all in society so that peace and good order prevails. So we'll cover in this workshop the idea that the law carries within it particular philosophical and theoretical assumptions about what constitutes or ought to constitute the law, how it operates or ought to operate, and for whose benefit or gain. These ideas are understood within the umbrella subject or discipline of jurisprudence. In the law, there are many branches or areas of jurisprudence, from formal to positivist to realist and pluralist, and most recently what some, including myself, would describe as indigenous jurisprudence. Now, the application of legal personhood to environmental entities such as a river or mountain draws breadth and meaning, we might say, from one or more of these different jurisprudential frameworks or branches. The main difference between them is where they start from, philosophically and methodologically, to answer the question, what is law? We don't expect you to have in-depth knowledge of jurisprudence, just to know that it is an important part of the law and, like policy, can be influenced or informed by a wide range of social, political, historical, managerial, fiscal, economic and cultural factors. In New Zealand, giving the Whanganui River legal personhood draws meaning mainly, I would argue, from Indigenous jurisprudence. Because of the particular historical moment and social context New Zealand finds herself in at the time it was awarded. However, in saying that, we might also then argue that its application might also have derived from a legal realist or pluralist perspective, and now that it is in legislative form can also be assessed from a legal positivist or formalist perspective. But the degree to which it would go one way or the other, or in one combination form or another, will depend on whether, as mentioned by Professor Ruru in her TED talk, the courts will interpret the legislation as intending to give personhood rights and responsibilities relating to protection against harm issues, or whether they will include in their reading recognition and protection of any accompanying or implicit Indigenous principles, values and norms. The feed clip, the link of which is provided on the slide, provides insight into some of the critiques associated with legal personhood of natural resources or entities like a river, such as the notion of how the river or its guardians would respond to a legal suit against it. The Vimeo clip responds to this critique in a manner that identifies the tensions that exist when inherently different legal systems cohabit. A tension well familiar to legal pluralists. The key thing to remember here is that legal personhood ascribes to natural and unnatural or non-human persons legal rights and responsibilities. What those are exactly and how enforceable they will be will depend on the jurisprudential frame or frames adopted by the court. Before we move to look at the legislation itself, here's a short YouTube clip for your viewing.
In 2017, New Zealand settled the longest running litigation in its history and made this river into a person. And it's not even the first time New Zealand's done that. Let's find out exactly what that means. The Whanganui River is New Zealand's third longest and extends from Mount Tongariro in the central North Island out to the Tasman Sea at the town of Whanganui. This river has special significance for a group of Māori people in New Zealand. Māori people can identify with different broad groups called iwi. For over a century, the Whanganui iwi has been struggling against the government of New Zealand for increased recognition and protection of the Whanganui River. In 2017, New Zealand's government bestowed legal personhood on the Whanganui River, declaring it to have all the rights, powers, duties, and liabilities of a person. But more amazingly than that, the ruling bound together the river, all its tributaries, and its cultural and spiritual significance into one entity called Te Awa Tupua. Te Awa Tupua, now with the rights of a person, is governed by a set of 4 principles specific to this legislation. 1. The river is the source of spiritual and physical sustenance. 2. The great river flows from the mountains to the sea. 3. I am the river and the river is me. 4. The small and large streams that flow into one another form one river. These 4 values broadly encapsulate that the river is a whole and dynamic system which sustains life around it and has a particular connection with the Māori people from that area. Any decisions affecting the river are now made following these 4 values. This is actually the second time New Zealand has granted legal personhood to a natural resource. In 2014, Te Urewera, an area in the North Island largely covered by forest, became a legal person under the Te Urewera Act 2014. The opening words to the Act read like a Lord of the Rings screenplay and describe this forest as ancient and enduring, a fortress of nature, alive with history. Its scenery is abundant with mystery, adventure, and remote beauty. Te Urewera owns its own land. That is to say, it owns itself. The Act of 2014 also has a clause which allows addition of new land into Te Urewera. New land must fulfill certain criteria, which mostly focus on whether the land is culturally significant, scientifically significant, or just particularly beautiful. These 2 pieces of legislation, which each focus so heavily on culture, science, and natural beauty, are a good reminder from this small Oceanian country on how we can really effectively use values-based laws to protect culture and the environment. Please subscribe, thumb, and comment if you enjoyed the video, and check out my other videos for more. Thanks for watching.
Suzanne, we could probably stop it there. Okay, and I'm just conscious of time, everyone, but what I thought we would do is I'll just, am I going back to sharing screen? Okay. Yep. What I thought I'd do now is there was a exercise where we would break out in groups, but instead of breaking out, it would be useful just if anyone has any top of mind comments or any thoughts that they'd like to share around this concept of legal personhood in your own respective states or countries, whether it's something that resonates. Do you have a similar concept? Is this something that you use to protect your natural environment, rivers, mountains, lakes, etc.? Or is it something that you might, you think your countries might be interested in having? So perhaps if there's anyone who'd like to kind of put their hand up to maybe offer any commentary on the concept of legal personhood for your particular country. Stephanus?
Yeah, thank you very much. Good morning. I am from Namibia, and maybe just to give a background, I am from indigenous group. I'm from the minority group, a marginalized group. I am from the San communities, and specifically from the Hain San. Those are the no formal known as the Bushmen. But just to appreciate the YouTube concept, is the personhood, the legal personhood being given to a natural entity, which inspired me. Because, and I think that is lacking in Namibia. I want to give a specific example of Etosha National Park. Etosha National Park, if you know, it's the biggest national park in Namibia, which was formerly inhabited by the Bushmen, the San group, of which I am also part of. But if our government could have perhaps adopted a system like this one, I mean, it could have benefited even the communities around that area. And they are currently, as we are speaking, the poorest of among the citizens of our country. And I definitely appreciate this concept. It could have changed our livelihoods entirely. Because then it owns up around the communities around it, whatever financial resources, whatever education systems comes out, it would have uplifted the lives of these people. And that's why I have definitely appreciated this video and the YouTube and it's lacking currently in our system, our government system. Yeah, I submit.
Fantastic. Yeah, no, that's really wonderful to hear. And certainly something that I think makes exercises like this, these kinds of dialogues and sharing of information really useful and meaningful. So thank you very much for that. Any other thoughts in terms of the place of legal personhood in your respective work environments or in your respective countries? Lillian?
Yes, so I think also this is a very new concept. It's good to see how progressive sort of the New Zealand system in actually giving this beautiful natural sort of forms legal identities. And I think Tanzania, I would say it is like Namibia, it's lacking. We don't see it here. And particularly, I do recognize that the government of Tanzania in particular has made a lot of effort in protecting the beauty and some of the UNESCO recognized sites, you know, the Ngorongoro, the Selous National Parks. And these are extremely amazing places with an ecosystem that's sort of self-sufficient. However, if there were, you know, these legal personhoods into these entities, we would, one, definitely protect the ecosystems and preserve the lives that they would not be. For example, right now we're building a hydroelectric dam right in the middle of Selous, which has been the biggest national reserve in Africa. I think maybe even, you know, one of the biggest in the world. And there's been a lot of contention fights around what that is mean in terms of the ecosystems, how we're protecting it and things like that. But if these places had such, you know, legal identities or rights, it would have protected it in a way that first, it serves multi-generational beauty and things that the ecosystems around it, the people around it will continue to preserve and adore the place, but also it could contribute to the whole climate conversations that we are having now, climate protection, environmental protection conversations that we're having now. And it's not just the Selous, we have the Ngorongoro and the like. So I think these are conversations that we've not had. It's our system has not evolved to that extent in recognizing this, but I wonder, you know, what forums we can start bringing this up so that, you know, it becomes something. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes. Yeah, no, appreciate the feedback and appreciate the appreciation of the concept. So is there anyone in the group that we have here whose country has adopted some form of legal personhood or has that in terms of the protection of their part of the environment?
Hello.
Hi.
Hello, everyone. first of all, I would want to ask a question. As a legal personhood of natural entities, are they the same thing as rights of nature? Okay.
So
Although in Nigeria,
yeah, sorry. So the legal personhood idea is that you give the natural entity
yeah,
legal rights. Yeah. And in the legislation in New Zealand, in any case, the one that you saw on the video clip, that legislation appoints a human custodian. So there's a representative of the state, of the government, and then there's a representative of the tribal area to where the natural entity sits. So in that particular river, so there's a what we call an iwi or a tribe, and there's a representative of that tribe who are custodians or guardians of the river. And so that legislation empowers them to act on behalf of the river to protect the interests of the river.
oh, okay. So it's almost as rights of nature.
Yeah.
I don't think it's recognized in Nigeria, but I'm aware that some communities, due to their religious belief, in the southeast of Nigeria, some part of communities there, they revere pythons. They don't kill pythons in their communities. Pythons, they don't kill them. If you kill them,
right,
you have to like bury them like you would bury a human being. So is that some sort of legal personhood for pythons?
Yeah, that would be interesting. So giving animals rights, legal rights, and how that would work. So obviously there's a lot of discussion that would need to be held over why it is that you would want to give that legal right and how that would work, and whose interests are at stake. But certainly, as far as I know, Tim and Suzanne, you guys might have more information, but as far as I know, legal personhood hasn't been given to animals.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much.
Not here, partly because we don't
Yeah,
have
not
many
in New
animals.
Zealand anyway. Yeah.
Birds, maybe we could look at, but we don't really have very many animals.
Yes, we also in South Africa, we do have a legislation that protects the environment. We have a National Environmental Management Waste Act, because like there's people, they like to pollute the environment. So there are legislation that protect the environment in South Africa, like the National Environmental Management Biodiversity Act, National Management Integrated Coastal Management Act, National Environmental Protected Areas Act, National Waste Act, Wastewater Act. So those are the kind of legislation we have in our country that protects the environment, especially when they want to come and explore in terms of mining. You cannot just do it. We have to get authorization and license and permit to obtain before a particular activity commences in that particular environment. So you are given right before you do it. You cannot just go for fishing. You have to get a license for fishing, because there are experts who can tell you, these are fish that are protected as a national heritage of the country. You can do this activity in this area. So those are kind of legislation we do have in South Africa. So all our environments are protected. You cannot just do anything in our environment. We have to go certain laws. Even the municipal bylaws are there to protect the environment. So we have to, get authorization from the legal authorities before you can do anything to our environment. Thanks.
Yeah, no, that's right. I mean, there is in most countries, if not all countries, resource management type legislation that has protection mechanisms to protect the environment. I guess what's different in this respect is the assumptions that we place on non-human entities. And so the assumption often in environmental management or environmental protection legislation is not that the environment or environmental entity in and of itself has legal rights. So it's a very, there's a whole lot of philosophical, cultural assumptions that come to the fore as a result of this new legislation of giving natural entities this particular personhood status. And that's why earlier on I talked about it having very Indigenous law dimensions. And that's because that particular legislation talks about the river as being an ancestor, which is not something that is assumed in the environmental management legislation. And so it is something that I think is really useful. It's an area that we put on the table for us to reflect on, think about, and just in terms of the ways in which our laws are evolving and its impact on how we understand the rule of law. So lots to think about. Thank you to those who contributed to the discussion, to our group discussion. I'm sorry that we weren't able to break up into groups so that you can talk more in the smaller groups. But when you get to do some of the other exercises, perhaps that Tim has set for you as well, you might be able to get some of that chance to kind of interweave some of this discussion on legal personhood with human rights. But that for me is my bit of the today's workshop. And I'm now going to give you an opportunity to have a bit of a longer break before you come back for Tim's session. But before I leave, is there any kind of questions, any burning questions that you have that you want to ask? Please feel free to do that now. Otherwise, you can put it into the chat and I'll respond to it into the chat. Okay, so thank you very much, everyone. And
thank you so much, Selau. Tim, I'm not sure how you feel about this, but perhaps we could have a 15-minute break. Would that, I'm not sure if Tim's there.
I am sorry. I was.
Oh, you are there.
I've been here. I was muted and started talking.
Yeah.
I made the rookie's mistake. They can have 20 minutes if they need it. It's fine. Like okay. I can roll with the punches. And we'd have time. We'll still have time, I think. I don't remember how long my little video clip is, but I've made some adjustments to my content and I can go over that when I begin about what I'll do. But
okay. Oh, yeah. Okay. Well, I see Julia's put in the chat 15 minutes is fine. So
all right. Yeah. So then
yes, they're keen to come back.
Let's do it.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll see you all in 15 minutes exactly from now.
Thanks, everyone.
I'm going to go get a tea, so I'll be back in a few minutes. We'll go ahead and give it a start. Hopefully everyone's back. You're able to get some tea or some coffee. I ran up and got a cup. And I hope those of you, as somebody mentioned earlier, they're recovering from COVID. I hope you're feeling well and you're staying hydrated. And I appreciate you turning out, even though you're not 100%. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and go through the second half of, excuse me, the talk for today. Just bear with me for a moment. Yep. Too many things on the screen. Everyone can see that okay?
Yes.
And hear me good. Okay, cool. So kia ora, everyone. And again, thanks for coming and being around. And it's good to see you all again after last week. You know, obviously it's always a difficult act to follow Professor Say Lao, but I'm going to give it a try, as I always do. I'll give it the old school try. And I'm going to talk to you for a bit about the second half of the concepts for today, which are institutions and issues that emerge. I have some slides that I mentioned earlier, and I've added this because you see I'm very handy with PowerPoint, and I can drop in little things like over here on where it says handouts, because I'm very, very skilled at this, a skill that I have for the PowerPoint. Those slides will be available to you on Canvas. That they're basically resources to begin with. They're almost like little cheat sheets. I know, again, that everyone on this call is, I think, fairly well versed on the human rights content that you see outlined there. So there's no real need for me, and in the interest of time, to make sure you have sufficient time to do the activity that we have planned for you. I just want to make those available to you so that you can refer to them. And I'll send them, well, I think Suzanne already does have them in the PowerPoint presentation itself, but I'll make sure that those are available to you and you can have those for your future reference. I'll, again, just come back to those issues to highlight them so that you have, right before your activity, so that you have them in mind when you engage in your group discussions, to have a think about how the problem I'm going to present to you exists within the context of your own respective jurisprudential systems, but also your respective legal institutional framework, contextual framework, but also when we layer over some of the sort of regional and international human rights standards, institutions, instruments, principles, all of those things, as they relate to the groups that you see that I've sort of identified here, just keep those in your mind as you work through the activity. And you don't need a very specific expert knowledge of them in order to engage with the activity. In fact, it's really more designed for you to engage with it from your jurisprudential traditions. But what I wanted to do to build on an aspect of what Say Lao was talking about, which deals a lot with legal principles, legal values, approaches to law and how we interpret law, and also hearkening back to one of the topics we talked about last week when we think about national and subnational entities for dealing with having responsibility for law. Because once we move beyond these sort of bedrock principles of law, and also kind of inherent in our notions of justice, and I think that that was sort of explored from our New Zealand context when we talked about legal personhood. It's kind of a merger of personhood as it exists in a common law system with indigenous values and feelings about the legal identity or the type of entitlement to rights that certain resources within the country should have. And that is, to many of your points and comments that you made, it sort of sets itself apart in some ways from mere environmental protection regulations or resource management provisions. It's kind of in a league of its own in some ways once you assign legal personhood to it. So that's like a little bit of the sort of insight from our side. But then you've identified some really good examples of where that could sort of translate over and how that might work. But then now we need to also think about it in terms of the institutions that we have and maybe the institutions that we want, or even to some of your comments, the institutions that might have once been. And many of you spoke very eloquently about experiences with colonialism and the imposition of certain institutions of law and governance that have been put to use by, let's say, a dominant political party or in favor of a dominant group at the expense of other groups. So this is something that happens across many former colonial states. And as you are identifying as sort of leaders within your own sectors, there's considerations that we need to have and take on board as we reflect on what do we have that works, what do we have that doesn't work. Is it a matter of making adjustments to a system, or is it, like you said, one of you said, it's an ill-fitting structure that maybe should be replaced in total. But irrespective of our views on this, the notion of institutions, and this is just in a general sense, and how they react and engage with concepts of public policy and law, here I think gives us a pretty good understanding, and also for us to think about institutions in a more nuanced way than just sort of like a courthouse or a parliament, right? As you can see, and I won't read you the whole definition on the screen, but March and Olson are pretty well-known researchers and academics who have dealt with these questions of institutions and institutionalism. But you can see from the definitions provided here that we can now start to think of and understand institutions as a bit broader than the brick and mortar institutions that we're used to. And that by following these sorts of logics of engagement of behavior, rules that structure and hem in how we behave in certain circumstances, that those are unique to all the institutions or organizations within government. But in particular, they relate to how law is made, how law is translated and sort of promoted in the community, issues we talked about last week, but also in terms of legal institutions, how we can have a place to resolve disputes that exist in the private sphere or between or disputes that implicate government, okay? So social relations, they can reduce flexibility in some ways because they're trying to limit the sort of discretion that actors could have to act on whims, let's say, as opposed to acting consistent with a code or a set of principles or values that guide decision-making, okay? So this is sort of like the broad way that we might think of how institutions operate in society. But how do we then think of them in terms of actual bodies that do actual things within our countries? So what I've done here is I've made this, developed this sort of hierarchy, if you will, of rule of law, but also human rights institutions. And again, following our way of thinking in terms of how political scientists like to break things down. So subnational or local or city level types of governance, or government and judicial decision making or administrative courts and bodies. And this goes from the low, quote unquote, lowest level. And by lowest here, I mean closest to the people, community justice bodies, but we have local forms of government up to state and provincial or regional governments, depending on how your particular respective country is structured. But then at the national level, many of you already referred to the existence of a parliament. Many of you work within the executives. I don't know how many here are from the judiciary, if any. But it's interesting because judiciaries are so important in the policy making process, but also the policy implementation process, and in the sort of the business of interpreting and ensuring that laws aren't constantly having to go back for revision to the legislature, right? So that they're the sort of become, in a sense, the common sense arbiters of the meaning of particular pieces of legislation or policies. We also have sort of, I would still refer to them as relatively new national human rights institutions, the existence of an ombudsman. I mentioned this in my talk last week, in the presence of an ombudsman here in New Zealand that can handle all sorts of things to make sure that the government is behaving consistent with its values or its statutory requirements. But some of you may also have things called law reform commissions or offices. I've advised and engaged with some of these in the Pacific before, that are charged with very specific tasks of reforming areas of law apart from and advising, in essence, the legislature or a court could refer a matter to a law reform commission as well, to sort of engage in this search and refinement process in an effort to sharpen or decide to replace an aspect of law. We also then have, of course, international and regional. So I've broken the international realm up, and I know there was a question posed earlier about where international law and international principles come in. Well, here we can see how they come in from an institutional perspective. And of course, most of these are agreed to by nation states in the form of treaties, either, in regional sense, that would be maybe bilateral treaties with countries that are party to particular instruments like we see here, or we can have international or with a global scope, and we tend to think of as our United Nations bodies, particularly in the human rights sphere, but we also have other examples, of course, as well, like World Bank and the World Trade Organization, but those are, sort of outside of the scope of what I want to talk about. What I did want to mention, and again, you'll see some references in here. There's a report I mentioned in passing, I think last time, but that if it hasn't been shared on Canvas already, I'll ensure that it's there for you, which was a review of legal issues and legal bodies within the Pacific region, which for many of you from a comparative perspective, you might be interested in reading. What I think was useful about the report that you might find interesting for other reasons, not necessarily for lesson drawing for your own purposes, but the way the report was structured and the way that it dealt with in a sort of international but yet regional scope might have some purchase for many of you who are interested in this type of comparative work across Africa. So I'll make sure that that's there if you want to take a look at it. I think it's a good read that you might be interested in. But I wanted to highlight one of the entities that they discussed, and they might be called something different your way, but it's worth considering the presence of these bodies and how they've been sort of promoted and have sort of spread in recent years. So as it mentions here, a growing trend is the rise in an emphasis on local and community-based bodies to administer justice, and also as a vehicle for promoting human rights. So they're intended to maintain order and resolve disputes, so they can be. It's really up to, if you have a central government that's sort of setting these things out, to define its jurisdiction and its competency. So what do you want it to do? And these could be things that already exist and are in practice. That could be matters of tradition or custom that perhaps the government wishes to incorporate in some form into its more formal policy making or adjudicative functions. So I've sort of highlighted some of the points there, and from the readings, you might imagine that there's both pros and cons to such things. Obviously, they're at the community level where people sort of get people where they eat and work. It's a frontline way of engaging with familiar faces in a familiar setting that is the closest to local custom. And in the Pacific, as the example is taken from this, that's the sort of objective, is to how do we maintain peace and harmony within particular communities? Well, this is seen as one positive way to do so. On the on the sort of con side, though, we can see that if you have such diffuse structures that are existing far from central government, they could actually cut the other way and be quite oppressive. They have a risk, anyways, of doing that. Of course, we could build in robust monitoring and evaluation frameworks into how we establish those and how we organize those from a central government or even a regional government level. So there's ways to counteract that, but they have to be sort of baked into the institutional makeup from the outset. Whoops, sorry about that. And so here, I know one of you or a couple groups, I think, mentioned some of these in your original sort of introductions and overviews. So hopefully you can see some resonance here. The sort of prevailing literature, as sort of summarized again in this report, tells us that there's really 4 species, I suppose, of a community justice bodies. We might think of community courts that are actually formally part of a state court hierarchy. There are local governance bodies that may have some administrative or adjudicative functions. There's, of course, non-state customary systems. And as I mentioned last time, we dealt with, when I worked in DRC, we dealt with several of these in the eastern part of the country, and particularly outside of Bukavu, that were quite interesting. And then I think someone mentioned specifically alternative dispute resolution, which you can think of as mediation of disputes, negotiation, ways of talking through disputes that exist. So that's like degrees even complete. They could be part of a formal community justice process, but the mediation and ADR I've been involved with has either been completely outside of the scope of the formal justice system. And you can just be a trained mediator or just somebody that's respected to be good with talking and listening to people and helping people in all manner of disputes. Those can be commercial or interpersonal, reach a negotiated settlement, in essence, to their dispute without going through a formal process. Here, what I wanted to highlight are known as public review entities. I've already mentioned these, but this is just sort of, you get the category of them. These are considered to be non-judicial in nature, but they have sort of quasi-judicial or decision-making functions. Okay, and we often see these in national human rights systems. We have NHRIs, or National Human Rights Institutions. Again, we see our old friend from the Ombudsman Office, and there's the African Ombudsman that sort of helps to sort of as a body that organizes across all of the various partners for ombudsman. But then in addition to those, so actual offices of things, we might add leadership codes that have sort of penalties or processes built into them to deal with shortcomings in that realm. And then, like I've already mentioned a moment ago, law reform commissions, which are kind of an odd, coming from in North America. The law reform commissions are not very common, but I have seen them in the Pacific, and I'd be interested to know to what extent these are used and how they are used in some of your countries. So perhaps you can highlight that in the comment box. I want to mention that, again, as each of these examples have shown or have been drawn to emphasize or to underscore the fact that while, again, as political scientists, we sort of have this problem of looking a lot towards government institutions and having a focus on formal laws, policies, and formal institutions and structures of government. But we also have to remember that, and consistent with some of the themes we discussed last time, that outside of government is just as important, and perhaps even more so within the human rights realm. Non-government organizations and civil society organizations are central to ensuring rule of law, influencing the development of local jurisprudence and promoting local jurisprudence and best practice, as well as protecting and advancing human rights. Providing, we think of community service organizations as providing services or welfare to people who are in need. But we also have to remember that on the other side, these organizations can also engage in advocacy on social and political economic issues. Think of, organizations related to or attached to the church, for example, often engage in these sorts of things, and they can be advocating on behalf of individuals from the local all the way to the national level and quite frankly, beyond. And as you see, I've mentioned some of the scholarship here down below that has, sort of studied these matters and found, it's a widely accepted principle that effective national human rights systems depend on strong government and non-government relations. So you need to have those organizations in place in order for the whole thing to work effectively. And this kind of harkens back to what we talked about last week with issues of accountability, democratic accountability, as well as bureaucratic accountability. So there's some references there that might be of interest to some of you who want to read further on it. If you have any trouble reaching those, please just reach out to me and I'll make sure you get them. Now, this is where I said I'm just going to remind you of these areas here again. The slides with like little kind of summary sheets that I've put together for you, you'll get after today's session, but I want to switch to presenting the problem for today and letting you go and do your discussions. But because I'm going to present to you a human migration issue, I want us to kind of reflect on, as we think about this, gender and women's rights issues, how they are implicated, children and youth rights. And this is not only for the migrant community, but also the host community. Migrant and minority rights, and some of you have already mentioned and identified being from some of these communities in your own countries, but then also these other human rights that we sort of beyond our just preservation of our lives and well-being, but religion, speech, and freedom of movement. So, Suzanne, could you show would you be able to show the video?
Yes, I will play that for you now.
Just keep in mind, everyone, while it's getting teed up, that what I've done is this will be maybe new for some of you. It deals with, the case is set in small island states, but it deals with the impacts of climate change and human mobility. So I'm keeping that in both to show you, similar to the case study we used with Celao, something that's unique to our region perhaps, but then also something that I know from working with many organizations and with you in East Africa in particular, sort of across many of your countries. I know issues that are very important to governments there to deal with. How do we deal with the phenomenon of human migration, and how do we resolve some of the long-term needs of populations that have come temporarily into our territories?
Sounds good, by the way.
Okay, kia ora, everyone. I'm going to speak to you for a few minutes now about our second case study, and you'll have an opportunity to work in your groups to explore this issue a little bit further in just a couple of moments. What we want to explore are the impacts of climate change within the Pacific on migration and citizenship issues. As some of you may recall, and I'm sure many of you have even worked on, this issue was front and center at the recent COP26. What you see on the slide now are some key facts that emerged in the most recent report of the IOM. Over 30 million people since 2020 were displaced due to disasters of one type or another, and this is throughout the world. We have to consider within this figure both internal movements of people as well as those who moved away to another country. And we know from our experience within the Pacific, often this is migration throughout the region. What the data fails to capture, however, are those slow onset events, such as we see in sea level rise, and other longer term climate change events that have seen disruptions to crops and other issues. While there is disagreement amongst experts as to the impact of climate change on human migration patterns, there is a growing consensus that over the rest of the 21st century, there is going to be an increased displacement of people, which means that with more people arriving in countries throughout the Pacific Rim and elsewhere, issues related to citizenship, visa rights, work rights, and other issues will become more and more important on the policy agendas within these countries. However, as the COP26 reminded us, we should not only be thinking about the worst case scenario. We have to also continue to work on climate mitigation measures, as well as efforts to think creatively about how to best protect Pacific cultures. Small island countries like Fiji, Kiribati, Marshall Islands, Solomon Islands, Tonga, Tuvalu, and Vanuatu are highly susceptible to climate-induced displacement. As the next slide will show in video form, there have been recent discussions around these issues that we should hear from the experts themselves.
Funafuti Atoll, the capital and one of 9 islands comprising the remote nation of Tuvalu. This is one of the smallest countries in the world. Its average elevation of 2 meters makes Tuvalu extremely vulnerable to storms and sea level rise. People the world over migrate in search of a better life. But this is a story about people on 2 small Pacific Island nations being forced to move by the potential disappearance of their homeland underwater. People have started to leave the islands, abandoning their homes. It's a concern shared by the nearby island nation of Kiribati.
It'd be a very sad day when there will no longer be a country, a nation that people call Kiribati.
The president says his people have the next few decades to prepare for relocation.
We are preparing our people, equipping them to be able to relocate if and when necessary with dignity. We would not wish to see our people as climate change refugees.
Sea level rise and unusually big waves are threatening the Kiribati population of about 100,000 people. But the older generation in Kiribati is not willing to leave.
Because if you were to ask me, and if you were to ask the elderly in Kiribati, the answer is no. They would wish to stay on, even die here. The best we can hope to have is to maintain the integrity of our culture. Whether we will be able to have our people settled all in one place, I doubt it. What personally I would like to see happen is for us to maintain a nation of Kiribati somehow. We have to do that so that the new generation or generations of Kiribati people in different parts of the world will have somewhere to go to say that this is what once was our nation.
Climate change and sea level rise are deadly and existential threats to Tuvalu and low-lying atoll countries. We are sinking, but so is everyone else. And no matter if we feel the impacts today, like in Tuvalu, or in 100 years, we will all still feel the dire effects of this global crisis one day. In Tuvalu, our islands are sacred to us. They contain the mana of our people. They were the home of our ancestors. They are the home of our people today. And we want them to remain the home of our people into the future. This is why this call to you from Tuvalu is not just a political statement. It is a call that reverberates from our 8 islands and our 12,000 people to the international community.
So while there are a few issues that emerged from those videos, for the purposes of our exercise today, we should think broadly about the questions of governance, jurisprudence, rule of law, and how these issues connect to our human rights principles. Within the context of human migration, we should note that there are limitations to cross-border migration for climate vulnerable people. Issues such as state sovereignty, the lack of actionable international law in this space, as well as a dearth of policy and other initiatives, have created a very uneven response to human migration issues. Okay, can you hear me? Okay.
Yep.
Cool. I just decided to trim that because the next thing it was going to tell you was this. So this is the activity that I wanted us to get to. So you're a member of your government's diplomatic team, or you're a technical advisor from your ministry advising the diplomatic team or working alongside them at a regional conference on the legal status of regional coastal communities should they lose their land to rising sea levels. The countries of your particular region have asked for all member states to advise on their position in granting permanent legal residency or citizenship to the nationals from the other countries, should circumstances require. So what I want you to do in your groups is just discuss, based on the information we've talked about today and your own understanding of your jurisprudence in your country, craft a position for the government to take on these matters. So really at this kind of late stage of the day, or midday for you guys, just to have a chat about what issues you think are implicated, whether you think that this could work, your country would be willing to do something about this, and what they might be willing to do, and how that sort of is informed by the things that we've been talking about today. So yeah, I'll share this. So could we go into our breakout rooms?
Kathy should have everyone should have a room assigned.
And I'll share this to the breakout room so you can see it. So, Suzanne, is everyone in the rooms?
Yes.
Okay, so just like give them 10 minutes, and then I don't know exactly how we should handle it, because we'd be right out of time. And since I don't have access to well, the 10 minutes, it's 8:15, I guess. So they come back, the 5 minutes, they can give a start to it, but then I guess we can try to go over a few minutes and see.
I mean, I think perhaps one of the other options, which I'm not sure if we've done before, you and I, but when we've been short on time, we've done basically just a chat bomb group contribution where there's not an individual who reports back for the group, but every person who wants to just puts in the chat, like, what is the thing that they think is most pressing, for example.
Okay. That sounds good. As long as they have, I feel like that is a good way to do it, because as long as it's interesting to hear from everybody, but the truth is like once one person starts talking, it's like 3 minutes have gone by, and then you know what I mean?
So I would say maybe just say to them, anyone who wants to share, just put it in the chat, and then that way we can collect it all. And hopefully they'll be on Canvas tomorrow, and then I can put it on.
Yeah,
put it on Canvas.
So where do I? Oops. If I just, no, I have to broadcast a message, right?
Yeah, I can broadcast a message if you want me to.
I just don't see that option now that I'm sharing.
You'd have to open the breakout rooms window. So if you bring up
Oh, yeah,
your bar and then
Yep. I got it. So what do you want me to say to them? Like, do they know what this concept is that you said? Photobomb?
probably not.
Chat bomb. Okay.
Chat bomb. We'll just just say when we come back, there's not going to be time for verbal feedback. So yeah, everyone can just put one, like, really their most important point, whatever they think is the most important, into the chat, and we'll all share together.
I let them know. Happy I found that video so quickly, actually, because
Yeah, well done. I sort of started playing, and all I did was check that it was their clean version, and I didn't even look at what the content was, because it was in the same folder as Say Loud's one.
No,
So I
it's all
just assumed
good.
it was the same thing.
I think what happened was after the first time we did it, well, I switched. So I the first time I recorded my content and did the case study stuff live, and it was just like too boring, like, to do it that way. So I decided to spice it up, and I would do, but keep the video in. So I went back to Tim, and he was able to integrate those two little clips from the prime minister and the foreign person of those two countries. He was able to weave them into the presentation. So I was like, what the heck? So I went and I found the slides, and it was still there. Like, I have the full copy, like the full version that includes the videos, but I was having trouble, I think, at some time sending those. Because you can't, they're too big for email or something.
They're too big, so you have to web drop them.
Yep.
And that expires.
Yes. Yep. Oh, you're not a fan of Helmet, are you, Suzanne, the band?
No.
I keep missing you. I don't know when our musical tastes are going to align.
Alien Weaponry played before Guns N' Roses.
I know, and I wasn't here for that. I would have gone to see that, or tried to. I probably wouldn't have been able to get tickets.
It was fantastic. It was such a great concert. It was raining. Didn't really matter. Everyone was wet. Nobody cared.
The Chats played at that too, right?
Yes.
I would like to see them too.
It was such a great concert. It really was. I'm so glad I went. It was one of those, and listened to Guns N' Roses since I was 10 years old. It was about time I actually saw them live.
Right. No, my kids, I like, sometimes I've got them listening to them, so they, occasionally. So it would have been fun to see that whole lineup, actually.
Yeah. No, I took my niece.
Oh, cool.
She'd never been to a rock concert before, so.
Do you know the twins? The first rock concert they went to was Alien Weaponry.
Oh wow!
Yeah, we went to see them. That when I invited you guys at that time.
Yeah, we couldn't make it.
Yeah, it was like a long time ago. And I saw
Yeah.
Tom Gregory was there, and his wife, I guess, or his girlfriend.
Yeah, Mandy.
Yeah. I've got two. I'm going to go to see. Well, now I'll get to see three because I'll get tickets to the Helmet Show. But I haven't seen them since I was in college. But Social Distortion's coming. I got my ticket to that, and then I've got my Billy Bragg ticket, per usual.
We're going to Billy Bragg.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. He's coming.
Yeah, we'll see you there.
Oh, you're going there. Oh, good.
Yeah. No, I booked when I saw he was coming. I was like, oh yeah, got it. Luke's seen him before, but I've only seen him do like a book reading. I haven't seen him perform.
Oh my God. I've seen him like 10 times, I think, like going back to like 1990, like in the mid 90s, you know. And we went to see him the last time he was here, and it was really cool. But what sucks is he goes after, you know, and he meets everybody. Like you can go like hang out after the gig, you know, like come out and like you can get your picture taken with him and stuff. And but we always have to rush back. It's like on a Sunday, so we can't. The last ferry's like at 11 o'clock or something. I'm so bummed about it. It'd be cool to meet him just because I've been listening to him for so long.
Yeah, when he did the book reading, it was a really small crowd. It was at a little bookshop in Mount Eden, and so you did get to meet him and chat to him, and it was really good. It was great.
Yeah,
we went there. That was just I don't know.
That's
a few
cool.
years ago now. We just wanted to kind of be in the same room with him.
Yeah, no, I totally get that. Yeah, that's awesome.
And I went with my nephew to see Red Hot Chili Peppers.
Oh yeah, how was that?
That was amazing. It was not. I've seen them a few times, but yeah, they've still got it. They were really, really good. And Post Malone was very entertaining. So.
Oh yeah, that's right. They played with Post Malone. Yeah.
Yeah.
Somebody had posted on like all the songs they didn't play on on like on Twitter. They were mad.
The Chili Peppers.
Yeah.
Yeah, my brother-in-law was with us as well, and he's like, I only knew like 4 of those songs, and we're like, dude, you need to get out of the 90s.
Right.
Anyway, they'll be back in 10 seconds.
Okay.
Okay.
Kiora, welcome back. Sorry that we still do have a few minutes left. And sorry that we had to go a little bit short on this, but I sent a message to the rooms. I don't know if you all saw it, but I'm wondering if we could use the chat function for people, anyone who would like to comment on this, to drop a comment in the chat, and then I could take a peek at it and maybe highlight some or engage with you there. I suppose if there's anyone who's really wants to say a few words, we could maybe take one comment that way and then do the rest in chat. Oh, we have a hand up already, Lillian. Take it away.
Yes, so we had a bit of a discussion in my team within the group, and I think 2 examples in particular. One really focused around the regional role in continuous efforts towards climate mitigation, so that you reduce the impact of the changes in the countries affected, the small islands affected. But then we also dived in a bit. In my Tanzania experience, it happened to be a humanitarian advisor, and I deal on a day-to-day basis with either IDPs, refugees, from all kinds of issues, either be conflict, climate-related concerns, and natural disasters. So, for example, in Tanzania particularly, if I have to respond as a Tanzanian diplomat in this, I don't think I would take a very progressive view as a Tanzanian diplomat, because our laws have regressed. Our position in human rights and accepting migrants, refugees, and IDPs is some different, migrants and refugees into the country. And those laws have regressed from 2015, where we naturalized, I think the only country to naturalize over 160,000 Burundians who had been affected by conflict and natural disasters, to now closing our borders to anyone so coming into the country, and also regularization process has completely halted for those who are in country or moving around. But as a non-state actor in this space, and I feel passionate about it, and if I have to advise policy, I think there is room to kickstart those regularization sort of processes, either not necessarily giving people legal status, but giving them some status so that they can become an integral part of the economy as they come in, decide to live here or move onwards. But there is also a conversation around, for example, right now we have a big issue around Ethiopians moving into southern part of Tanzania. Those are irregular migrants, and they're running away maybe from conflict, but as well as climate changes. So now we have La Nina, and we're expecting to have El Nino in Ethiopia, Somalia, and the likes in the northern Kenya. Can we give them safe routes into, and those things can be embedded within our refugee and migrant policies, and so that we can be able to accommodate the need that is growing, the crisis for me in particular, I would say the crisis that's growing in the northern of Horn Africa region. And I could engage more on this, but I'll stop here. We don't have time.
No, thank you for that. I mean, I think what's really interesting about what you highlighted was that, and I think this is consistent across many countries, there isn't just a one, like a perpetually against migration or totally open borders, that these things tend to ebb and flow. And like you were saying, that there's been recent changes where on the one hand, the government regularizes the status of a large number of people. And then there's sort of this, okay, well, that's enough. And in the United States, the same sort of pattern happened back, there's been no ability to move forward on any sort of policy change there, but in recent years, but this is the same sort of thing that happened in the past. And in some ways, being open and generous and sort of regularizing the status of a large number of people can have like that sort of backlash policy wise, and sort of the raising of the bridges, right? That kind of thing. So that's a really interesting dynamic that you mentioned. Thank you for that. I haven't noticed anybody else in the chat, so I don't know. I know we're right at the end of time. Did anyone else want to speak as opposed to type in the chat, or? Yeah, Sufyan.
Yes.
I'm not really reading you, Sufyan. If you're still, sorry, go ahead.
Okay, Ethiopia has an experience of granting permanent residency for legal residency for the Rastafarians.
Yeah.
Before long time before, it is 60 or 50 years ago, Rastafarians has been residing here, and they are having this permanent legal residency. And on the other hand, there are also due to wars and natural disasters or conflicts between people, among people come to the Ethiopia and reside in temporarily manner, temporarily. For example, in the South Sudan and Somalia, in Western Ethiopia and Somalia in Eastern Ethiopia are reside temporarily. The government is giving temporary residency for these migrants to coming to Ethiopia. At the same time, Ethiopians also migrate for the economical reasons to the other countries like South Africa, and people are migrating to there. And it is coming in and coming out due to different reasons that can be economical or disaster or conflict or conflict between the war. It can be other reasons. So we cannot say there is no such a granting permanent legal residency here, but government is granting temporarily people are residing here in Ethiopia, coming from different countries to Ethiopia. I just to add this point. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And I, that's, that adds to the last comment as well, where, I think if we know that our countries are sort of sympathetic or to particular groups, remember the solution to the problem, there isn't one solution, of course, right? So if we're thinking about it from a diplomatic perspective, we're dealing with political dynamics within our own country, but we're also just trying to figure out, okay, if we can't take people because of the political situation in our own country, are there other things that we can do to facilitate the safe movement or that location of people in a third country? So there are some different roles that we can play, and we can sort of leverage some of these pockets of sympathetic policies that we've had to some groups of migrants in the past for historical reasons. Yeah, and Lillian's made a really important point. Yeah, questions of sovereignty and how to uphold human rights, the making permanent of people that have come in and their status, like granting legal status. These are really, really important and not easy to solve issues, as many of you have already highlighted. I'm mindful of the time, and I don't want to keep anyone here beyond this, but as I talked to Suzanne during the break, you can keep posting things in the chat if you want, and we can get a record of that. But once we'll also have a discussion area on the Canvas, I guess, is it? And you'll be able to post there as well, so we can continue to probe this. So just briefly in summary, we've talked about institutions concerned with jurisprudence, rule of law, human rights as a sort of tangent of that, that they're far-reaching and they cut across many levels of government, but that we also have to remember that they include international, regional, global organizations, as well as community organizations within our countries. That particularly, even in some of the cases that you all just mentioned, we see these cross-cutting human rights issues to deal with women, children, youth. And all of you had examples from your countries of migrants and large migrant flows and historic groups that have had to be regularized or sort of recognized within your countries. And it's a difficult tension between state sovereignty, international responsibilities for granting asylum and safety to people fleeing particular conflict is what we're most used to. But of course, economic migrants, then the question's like, okay, there's a regular visa and application process for that. How do we deal with that? In Selau's portion, we highlighted and expanded our concepts of thinking about human rights and protections and state sovereignty to include in protection of environmental resources and the granting of legal personhood and other indigenous rights. So working within the space requires that we be familiar with the diversity of these trends within human rights and indigenous jurisprudence, and that we sort of think about some of the cutting edge issues that I think our case studies today help to highlight. So I just, wanted to thank you for being here and invite you, of course, to reach out to us if you have questions. I see there was a hand up. I'm happy to stay a few minutes to chat, but I did want to just draw the formal proceedings to a close. You have both email addresses for myself and Selau, and you're please invited to reach out to us with any questions, comments, or follow-up. We always love hearing about your experiences. So thank you for your time tonight, for us tonight, but for you this morning and today. And I look forward to reading your chats and can stay for a little bit after to chat. I'll hand it back over to Suzanne at this point.
Thanks, Tim. So mostly I just wanted to say ngā mihi nui. Thank you very, very much to both of you for some really fascinating material, to all of you scholars for fascinating discussion and examples. We always learn so much. It's wonderful. So as usual, as is tika, as is proper, we just close with a quick karakia. Kia whakairia te tapu, kia wātia ai te ara, kia turuki whakatata ai, kia turuki whakataha ai, homie, huie, tai kie. So thank you very much, everyone. And I will see you back again tomorrow, where we'll be talking lots more about corruption and cybersecurity. So yes, thank you both to Tim and Salau. Have a good day, everyone. Have a good evening.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Have a good
Okay.
evening.
Bye.
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 Thank you, everyone.
Good night.
Bye.